He had a good cut at that one.
So you have more military traffic then?
Yeah. See, we get a lot of helicopters out of Rucker. Now, an operation is a landing or a takeoff, so when an airliner comes in and then departs, that's two operations. 1,000 operations a year at this airport. So that's about 52,000 landings or 52,000 takeoffs.
Capital improvements are in addition to that?
Are in addition.
What have you been averaging the last, say, 5 years of capital improvement?
So we've been averaging at least $500,000 a year or more, probably 750,000.
Would you say this is one of the busier airports in the South or in Alabama or what?
We are the, I think we rank, fourth in the state of Alabama. So you got Birmingham.
So Houston?
No. And they only have one airline, that's Southern.
Oh.
Yes. What's your overflight?
This one here is going to depart. I have one land on 33 there. Sharp. 012.
Can't remember whether I told you or whether I'm in here over the window.
Mr. King, you're at Smith.
Your structural lights will be down there on the both sides we're on. Yeah, but the trouble is that footprint will tear that up in a hurry. Yeah. That there clean. He's sharp though. He's sharp. Have that thing ready. In 72. October 72, and that's the last fatality on the airport out here.
How many 890 say I'm 50? Did you see the monster attack on Eastern last night?
No. I stay away from that in mobs scene, I tell you.
I went to the lake and went fishing.
You know, earlier in the show, Ivy told you that I was going to be throwing darts with an international dart throwing champion, and I'd like to introduce him right now, Ken Brown. Ken, welcome to Montgomery.
Thank you very much. Pleased to meet you.
You know, we've been talking about darts here and looking at this dartboard, and darts is a much more complicated game than perhaps the Americans have been considering all these years. I wonder if you could take us through the board here and tell us exactly how the game is played and how it is scored.
It's not as complicated as it looks or as it sounds. Once you get into it, it's quite simple, except for learning the numbers. The American way of playing, in a majority of places, is to throw for the bullseye and the bullseye only, and none of the other numbers count. But the proper way to play is from 301 points, starting on a double, which is the outer ring here, which is worth twice the points by the number. The next circle in is a treble circle, so that is worth 3 times the number. The green round the centre is worth 25 points, and 50 for the actual centre.
So you're starting with 301 points and working backward.
You subtract, once you have scored a double to start the game...
You have to score a double to start.
You have to score a double to start. It can be anyone on the board, which you've got 21. You've got the 20 round the outside, and the bullseye, because it is twice as the 25, that counts as a double as well. Then once you have scored a double to start, you subtract that, plus any other score you might get with it, from the 301 points. Then the idea is to reduce the score as quickly as possible by going for the higher scores. The highest score on the dartboard is a treble 20, which is worth 60 points. So with 3 darts, you can score 180 points, 3 times treble 20.
Right.
To win the game, you must finish on a double, but it must be the exact number that you require.
This is where it gets complicated.
That's where it can get complicated, because there are so many permutations when you are on a finishing shot.
Or calculations, as we might say.
Yes, to work out the best way to go for a double, you might be better on than others. If you score more than the required number, you lose that throw of 3 darts and revert back to the number you wanted prior to that throw, which gives your opponent another chance.
So after we learned the ground rules of official dart throwing, it was off for our Alabama Illustrated challenge match. I got into the game with this double 6. This meant that I could now begin to work backward from 301, and I was already down to 289. Ken was very consistent, as you can see here, but couldn't quite get a double to get into the game. A little later on, things were looking good for the challenger. But several throws later, Ken got a very serious look on his face and hit this double 16 and was on his way. For a moment there, I thought I'd been had by the British champion. I managed to cut my score down to 2, but all Ken needed was a double 5, which he got here. And it was still close. I only lost by 2 points. Darts, anyone?
I started doing this after I first got married. We had bought a couch and wanted to have a painting over it, but making payments on the couch didn't allow any extra money to buy a painting. So I had seen this type of work done before and decided I could do this. So I asked all my friends and relatives to mail me scraps of fabric, and I made one. We actually hung it on the wall, and it's still hanging on the wall in another room of the house. I've tried to sell these at craft shows and types of things, but there's so much time and money involved in one of these, time-wise, to make one, that I have not really been very successful at it. Start out by using a great big piece of background material, and this one that I'm working on here, I'm going to have what I call a patchwork background. A number of various fabrics make up the background to the piece instead of having one solid piece. They each are sewn down. Many times edges are turned under, as in these pieces. Sometimes I just leave the raw edge and stitch it down flat without turning it under. Once I get the entire background pieced together in colors that I like, then we start with the next layer. In this case, I'm putting some palm trees over here, some foliage over here, and more over there. And then I'll come in. This particular piece will have at least 2 cats in it, along with a bird and a butterfly and maybe some other things in here. But I start with a background and then do another foliage-type background over that. And then we work into the actual animals or whatever that will go in the front. And for those, I make patterns. For the rest of this, I just cut and pin, and if it works out, I sew it down, and if it doesn't look good, I cut and pin some more until I get something that will look good. The whole thing has to flow together as a design, and you go back to your basic principles of design to get it made. This one I call the moon. A friend had given me quite a few buttons, and amongst them were a number of mother-of-pearl buttons, and I kept looking at those and thinking there ought to be something I could do with them. Finally, I decided they reminded me of craters on the moon, so I decided to do a stitchery of them. This one actually has no applique in it. It is simply a variety of stitches with a variety of threads. There's some metallic threads over here at this edge with little tiny beads that you would use in making a garment, perhaps. The buttons are scattered around, and then some all wool threads, thicker threads as it goes this way. I want it to be darker over there and appear lighter as you come this direction. All the buttons are sewn down with just regular stitching thread, and then the various yarns in a variety of different stitches to give the impression of craters on the moon. This one I call tree, and I wanted to build up a lot of different textures on this tree. So there are a lot of different pieces of applique, which is simply one fabric being sewn on top of another. Here, 4 or 5 pieces worked into the basic tree background, and then also stitching on top of that. Sometimes I use embroidery floss like I used on these birds. Sometimes I use different yarns here. This piece right here is simply a piece of fabric that I pushed and pulled.
This looks like my sports jacket.
It probably is. A lot of these are pieces of garments.
Is that tweed?
Yes, this is. This is an old stocking I wore when those net stockings were in
Looks
stock.
like an old sweater of mine.
That's
here.
a sweater. My cat ate the first one, so I had to put another piece on down. This is drapery out of my bedroom. This is a piece of my aunt's clothing. This is one reason I like them, because
Your aunt's clothing.
I cut up old clothes. I buy old clothes. There are lots of different pieces in here that remind me of people. This is a brocade, right? A lot of upholstery fabrics. I use a lot of upholstery fabrics that I simply buy scraps of to use. This is probably an old towel right here. These are yarns. Some of these yarns are very thick and then get thin again. This is a mohair type that's just been looped around. I use a variety of stitches, but basically 3 or 4. People have offered me all of $50 for, and there must be $300 or 300 hours worth of work, and at $1 an hour, $300 is cheap. I couldn't even begin to make minimum wage, let alone support myself at this. I do it because I enjoy it.
During the past 15 years, Eugene Ames says the number of independent oil well drillers has dropped by 50%, and he forecast more such reductions in their numbers in the future. Why? The independents call it the needless federal regulation. Ames says it's charts like this one that caused them to spend more and more money and time in litigating the price they can charge for the oil they drill.
If deregulation came about totally as you're talking about, how much would prices go up on gas and oil here? Or, you know, in the States?
Well, really very little. Now,
Would there be a sudden jump right at the beginning?
It'd be very little. You wouldn't really notice it to speak of. In the state of Texas, we have deregulation because we have the free market within the state, which is called the intra-state market, which has been, we thought it was a constitutional right, but we understand that in the new energy bill there will be no more free market within the states. But to answer your question, where we have had the free market in the last few years, Texas has developed an oversupply of gas, and the price has dropped about 15%. So in the long run, free market will allow the price to drop. Now, granted, when you have if you had immediate deregulation, your prices probably would go up in some areas locally somewhat. They say now that if all price controls were removed on oil, the price of gasoline at the pump would go up 4 or 5 cents a gallon.
But it would level off and stay there for a while.
Well, it would level off, and you would develop your domestic oil supply to the maximum.
All right, so regulation is also curtailing the amount of drilling that's occurring.
It certainly is.
How about here in Alabama?
In Alabama, there are some very excellent geological prospects for deep, expensive gas, the Smackover formations, and possibly even deeper.
And you say they're not being drilled because of regulation?
They're not being drilled to the frequency that they would be drilled if there were a free market. Because most of your gas market for gas developed and produced in Alabama is outside the state of Alabama. So it has to go into the interstate market, which at this time the price is controlled at roughly $1.50 per MCF. Well, if I'm
What's an MCF?
Per 1,000 cubic foot of gas.
Okay.
So if I am an independent or a producer who's looking for gas, I'd rather go to Texas or Louisiana where I can get the price near almost $2 per MCF. Now, under the new energy compromise bill, if it is passed, you would see the price rise under that bill for new gas to approximately $1.90 in Alabama.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you, to make some comparisons between regulation and deregulation production-wise of Alabama gas or petroleum. What would the difference be? How much more gas would Alabama produce, or how much more?
Well, under deregulation, Alabama would be developing more of the supply in Alabama would be developed because there would be incentive to develop it.
Do you feel like because of this energy compromise package that's going before the House that you're making an 11th hour plea to perhaps come up with some kind of a better bill, a deregulation bill?
All I'm saying is that this energy package, I presume that it's going to pass. I presume the President wants it, and it will pass, and his energy bill then will pass. But it will be a very watered-down, totally ineffective energy bill, and it won't help the dollar. There's no way it can really help the value of the dollar, although it's been represented that this is one of the causes for that this energy compromise will help the falling value of the dollar. They're going to have to come back next year and start over again with energy legislation. And the only real energy legislation that will do any good is deregulation and decontrol of oil and gas. Now, I ultimately feel that that will happen because these regulations are so cumbersome. Did you know that the Department of FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is responsible for the compliance with the regulations, has issued a statement that this energy bill is unenforceable because it is so complex. They say it will be litigated for many years, and this is in writing. There's been a memorandum that's been passed out that's been public. So these regulations are going to die of their own weight, and I would predict that my own feeling is that we will see the pendulum swing back within a couple of years and go back to the free market in this country.
Ames says the economy's tie to energy will ultimately force the deregulation of gas and oil prices to avoid what he calls total economic collapse. I'm Chris Grimshaw for Alabama Illustrated.
Actually, I get a little upset about the way the government is handling certain issues. Last year, I have received, and I'm sure many other faculty members throughout the United States have received the same letter from the White House signed by Schlesinger, stating that President Carter is living up to his campaign promises and is asking us to submit proposals how to solve the energy problem. And that sounded like a hooray for us, even though we received 3 days later this letter than the deadline. So instead of answering that request to Schlesinger, with one of my colleagues, we said that let's write the letter directly to the boss. So we sent it to President Carter, and then we were very much shocked when a few months later we have received a letter from a federal bureaucrat by the name of Klenzik, in which he referred to, let me read some lines from that letter, because that tells you what kind of situation we have. He started this way: "Thank you for your letter to President Carter regarding an invention. We were answering a request and we never referred to any invention of ours, and first of all, you can imagine what Werner von Braun would have said at the time when he proposed how to get to the moon. Thank you for your moon invention."
I think everyone has noticed by now that you are not a native-born American. Tell us a little about yourself.
I was born in Hungary, and I left Hungary after the Hungarian Revolution. I was involved in that one up to my ear, and you can guess it from the very fact that I must have been involved, since I am reacting the way to issues like I reacted to this attitude by the White House bureaucrats. And since I had no other alternative, I left the country at that time, and I came to the West, and somehow I feel that that accent will be an advantage in this campaign, in the sense that I lived in communism for 12 years, and if anybody in Congress knows how to deal with the communists, I would be one who knows how do they operate, and what is their psychology, how do they infiltrate, and what are the kind of manipulations with which they want to take over the greatest Western power, the United States.
Some of the items in your platform are based on a libertarian point of view. First of all, explain what is a libertarian point of view.
The libertarian view, at least by the libertarians, is considered nothing else than the Jeffersonian philosophy, which basically means to give as much liberty to the individual as it is possible humanly, and to give as much liberty to our business enterprises as it is possible within the system without anarchy. That's basically what you could.
If we can, briefly, what would you do to solve the energy problem?
In the form of the jet streams. If you raise up large platforms, disc-like platforms, with the aid of buoyant forces and partially by aerodynamic forces, in the jet stream you could use wind turbines that would run your generators. And his calculations indicate, on the basis of U.S. Weather Bureau data, that a disk with a diameter of about 1/3 of a mile, with 200 giant wind turbines, you could generate around 30 gigawatt. Now, this is much more than what is used by a country like France.
we will all be getting older as we are older than when we started this interview. You have an interesting idea about elderly citizens.
That would solve, by the way, even the social security problem, because that's one of our big problems, that the elderly citizens have to be supported by the younger ones. And I am saying that why don't we rejuvenate people? Now, this might sound a little strange idea, but I looked into that issue, and I get all the reference material in this area, especially the work of Björkson, who worked quite a bit along these lines, and the indications show that in 10 years we could lick that problem, and in that case those citizens who would like to stay young could stay young if they would use the enzymes that we are producing. And since we live in a democratic system, accordingly to my own belief in this issue, we could give our citizens a choice. If you want to age, you can reproduce, but in that case you will die. If you don't want to age, you should not reproduce, because otherwise we will have overpopulation. And the choice would be yours, which route you take.
Bring it about, the Senate would have to recede to the House, or else they get no bill at all.
If it does go through in the Senate, in economic terms, what would this mean to the area surrounding Fort Rucker?
Well, it's really difficult to say, because there will be about 80 more civilian instructors. There will be about 600 more pilots to go through. But there will have to be some additional facilities built to accommodate the training facilities, not just housing. It would just be a tremendous shot in the arm for the entire Fort Rucker complex, because this would finally and at last consolidate all helicopter training Fort Rucker would train Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, National Guard, plus NATO troops, plus the contracts we have with Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Israel, and the Mideast countries. So this would really be the helicopter capital of the world for training, and it's very difficult to define the extent of the economic plus.
Does your feedback from these different branches of the service indicate that they are all in favor of this consolidation?
The Army is very much in favor of it because they know they would have to have enhanced facilities for everyone. The Air Force is very satisfied because the Army's been training Air Force pilots for years, and they're happy with it. The people themselves that have tried it and looked at it on the lower echelon of the Navy and the Marine Corps say that, well, particularly the Marine Corps, said this is the type of training that they do. So, but you find everybody from the lower levels up in the Navy adamantly opposed to it because the Navy's got to do it its own way because they fly over water, and and the facts show that in the Navy training syllabus, they teach them they fly over water less than 1 hour. So the argument